Hello, welcome to today's broadcast. I'm Dav. Thanks for joining me. I'm intending to talk about Fox News nighttime host person, Judge Jeanine Pirro, and her remarks likening the ending of Amazon hosting the alternative to Twitter, Parler, to the shutdown of that platform as Kristallnacht. Hi, Kimchi. Hi, Engage. Nice to see you. So I thought that I could quickly play the clip from Fox News of her saying that to the Fox and Friends hosts, Ainsley and Steve and those chaps. Hi, Dee. Hi, Dee. How you doing? So you could see for yourselves. And then also there are some other clips because Jake Tapper also shared a video from a sports reporter whose grandfather escaped a death camp at 8 years of age, lying under some corpses so that when all the bodies were thrown into a pit at nighttime, he could escape. Hi, Alan. Hi, Elizabeth. So first of all, here's Judge Jeanine. And I want to remind people that the likely reason she did this, that she mentioned Kristallnacht as a parallel to the ending of hosting services for the right-wing conservative, no-holds-barred social media platform to Kristallnacht, is likely because Arnold Schwarzenegger used that term to denounce Republican behavior and Trump behavior, likening it to what happened in Austria, that his father, having presumably participated in Nazi rule, was a broken man who drank at least 1 or 2 nights a week and would come home and beat his family. And that Arnold Schwarzenegger didn't judge him for that because that was also happening in all his neighbors' homes as well. He could hear it. So broken men, broken by what they had seen and what they had done. So basically, to help unite America against domestic terrorism and white nationalism, Arnold Schwarzenegger essentially admitted that his father was a Nazi or affiliated with the Nazis, which is a big step for him to have taken and a big sacrifice to reach Americans and to help them understand that this is the moment where decent people have to be bold and stand up and not pamper and not pander to white nationalists who conducted an insurrection against the United States. So here we go. This is Fox and Friends.
Let's bring in Judge Jeanine Pirro, host of Justice with Judge Jeanine. Good morning, Judge.
Good morning.
Good morning. What's your reaction to that? Parler shut down.
Well, look, they gave us a taste of this pre-election when they suppressed the Hunter Biden story. And now that they've won, what we're seeing is a kind of censorship that is akin to a Kristallnacht, where they decide what we can communicate about. You know,
let's bring in Judge Jeanine Pirro, host of Justice with Judge Jeanine.
So
Good
that
morning,
was
Judge.
Judge Jeanine Pirro likening the deplatforming of a no-holds-barred, no monitoring, no censorship platform that was a host for planning the attacks on the Capitol recently that resulted in the death of one police officer, the suicide of another police officer, and the shooting death of a veteran who was trying to break through into the speaker's lobby to attack American legislators. Anyway, the next thing I would like to share is that Jake Tapper points out that while Fox hosts compare deplatforming a social media app to Kristallnacht, and actual neo-Nazis stormed the Capitol alongside Team MAGA. I mean, on a Venn diagram, I think there's considerable overlap between those two circles, but anyway, neo-Nazis stormed the Capitol alongside Team MAGA. Take a moment to think about what Nazi evil really is. And Jake Tapper shared this, which is someone called Ari Alexander. And he said, today we Anyway, I'll let you hear his own words. So he's celebrating his grandfather's life.
Have you ever thought about what you would say to your hero given the chance? How much or how little you would say? What do you say to someone who has lived an unfathomably harder life so yours could be easier? My hero is my grandfather, Ehil Schusterman, who died Friday, January 8th, at the age of 86. He lived through years of hard times so that his children and his children's children could have a better life. One of his two grandsons is an oncologist. He gave doctors the advice needed to treat his grandfather. His other grandson isn't a doctor or a lawyer like every Jewish grandparent wishes, but his other grandson sits here, tasked by a generation of survivors of telling his story. So here it is. Ehil Schusterman was born in Ukraine shortly before World War II. As a little boy, his father was killed in a Nazi firing line. At 8 years old, he hid himself among the dead at Pechora concentration camp, and when the bodies were thrown into a pit, he used the opportunity of night to escape. He spent his whole life working hard, manual labor jobs. He was in the Red Army, fighting for a country he would eventually leave because of virulent anti-Semitism. He worked at a gate factory, making enclosures for people who would never open their hearts to him. Through it all, his determination to survive gave way and will continue to give way for countless generations to thrive. His will to live is why I live. He loved his kids, he loved his grandkids, and he shared tremendous happiness for someone who had lived what he had lived.
So I just thought that was important to share. To remember what Nazism actually did to people, and that the analogy to Parler being deplatformed and Kristallnacht, where dozens of Jewish people were killed and many businesses were damaged and multiple Jewish men were taken away to camps. So your family who were Jews, put on Nazi uniforms and escaped from the country, came to the US and then went back to fight the Nazis. That's good for them. Well done. Thank you, Elizabeth. I consider it to be a public service that I am no longer embarrassed about crying on the internet. It's okay. I was most moved when Rachel Maddow cried, essentially on air, when the news broke that the Trump administration were detaining babies, that they had taken babies from their parents, from their migrant refugee parents, and put them in jails for babies, detention centers for babies. Literal babies. I think the youngest I've heard of has been 4 months of age. But to me, that's an expected product of a fascistic government, and is also worthy of tears and sadness. And that's part of the catharsis your brain goes through to move away from a shocked and horrified and immobilized state into a place where you are more prepared to take action. So I'm not ashamed of tears. Tears is a stage. Tears is an emotional journey towards resolve. So you cry, that helps you unlock a little bit of whatever normalcy bias you have that argues the government must surely be humane and represent the people and act for good, and the government couldn't do bad things. So if you avoid the tears and you keep smiling and keep just looking at an imaginary ideal of what the government is like, rather than contend with what the government is actually doing, if you never let yourself feel that sadness, if you never accept that new reality of human evil, human destructiveness happening, indefensible violence against vulnerable people, then you never bolster your resolve to do what's necessary. And I think it's so important to identify when the right make false accusations against Democrats and women, that is a prelude to violence, and it is a presager, it is a form of violence in and of itself. if they say out loud that Democrats are mass murderers because Democrats support reproductive choice, then that is not just something to laugh at or dismiss. That is them accusing you of committing a Holocaust in order to work themselves up into a state of emotional preparedness where they will try and attack and kill you. If you see the people who tried to bludgeon a police officer to death with an American flag, those people have repeatedly talked themselves into a position whereby the people that they're attacking aren't human, or that they are mass murderers of babies, etc. So it's an important point to recognize that those false accusations they make have consequences for us and for them, but consequences that we need to keep abreast of. Thank you, Elizabeth. Thank you, Dee. And I'm sorry you've been crying as well. I saw that comment earlier. Yeah, crying is cleansing. Bless your heart. Thank you. Thank you. I will share something that touched me the other day because, as you all know, I'm Australian and my acquaintance with American history is of a fairly recent duration. So I was listening to a podcast in which Molly Jong-Fast said that she grew up as a Jewish person in America and was told stories of Jews in the South working for civil rights, and that it was impressed upon her very strongly and repeatedly that the people who come to oppress Black Americans will also eventually come for you too, because you're Jewish. And that is an underlying premise to any cooperation and support, that Jewish people sometimes offer civil rights activists because we know that it's important to stick together. Oh, need a tissue. All right. Molly says South Dakota is taking newborns from mothers and housing them in motels. Are you talking about children born to migrants in detention? That's not okay. Thanks for telling me. Yes, we will never forget, and we will band together and talk together so we strengthen each other's resolve, and be humble enough to keep checking in with each other and reading the news and making sure that we're not just sucked into a QAnon type of fabricated reality. We read the news and go, no, this is real. This is a horrifying reality, but it's not a made up reality like the QAnon fake conspiracy that there's a secret cabal of wealthy people in the Democratic Party who are involved in trafficking children. Now, the thing is, trafficking children and trafficking humans, men, women, and children, is actually a problem that is under-recognized. So the QAnon people have a nugget of truth around which they have built a fabulous plot that it's just Democrats doing this. There are likely to be wealthy people involved in crimes, but it's not something that's just part of the Democratic Party and that Hillary and Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer are involved in while Trump's leading a secret war against global pedophiles. Trump is a pedophile, an accused pedophile who was named in a civil lawsuit in 2016. He and Jeffrey Epstein were the named defendants for raping a woman called Katie Jones when she was 13 years old. And at that point, it was not widely known that Jeffrey Epstein was an unrepentant sex trafficker and pedophile. So Donald Trump was just linked with him at that point, and the case was withdrawn apparently because of death threats. Not everybody knows about it, but I would imagine more people would find it plausible, realizing now that Trump has so little scruples that he will pit Americans against each other and incite a riot in the most deliberate and mindful way. He is not crazy. He has not lost his mind. I admit I was looking at the verbal mistakes he was making last year and suggesting that he was exhibiting signs of early dementia. And I'm sorry I did that now because, yes, I still do think some of his memory problems and some of his verbal problems do indicate that he's on that trajectory, but it's merely an indication. I still think he has very strong self-preservational instincts. And look, he's capable of giving an hour-long speech that shrewdly manipulates people into a state of preparedness for violence. And look, the violence exhibited by the insurrectionists at the Capitol on the 6th of January weren't just triggered by Trump's speech. They went there prepared for violence, many in paramilitary gear, with zip ties to take legislators hostage. And one presumes the intention was to try and force them at gunpoint or weapon-pointed, threat of death anyway, to destroy the Electoral College votes and pronounce Trump the winner of the election. That was a way that they thought they could cut off the process of confirming Joe Biden's already confirmed multiple times election victory, but that they could disrupt the formal procedures for furthering that confirmation in additional confirmatory steps in time enough to say, no, Trump's the legitimate winner. I mean, how Trump and they thought it would work out, I imagine, is they just get a declaration from legislators under duress, under violent overthrow of the government, that Trump is the winner, and then Trump gets to declare martial law. And I guess that's how they thought it would proceed. I only realized that follow through when I saw someone say, thank goodness DC has laws against open carry for guns, so that those people couldn't all easily bring guns into DC. And they said that's perhaps all that stopped America from now being under martial law. And certainly the plans for violence aren't finished. I can go back to Twitter and have a look, but I know the FBI has now released something to say that plans to attack state capitol buildings in 50 states are being discussed online. Somebody wrote something about Colin Powell. So from when I was younger, I remember that Colin Powell supported the Iraq War. And the news is that he told CNN this weekend that he, Colin Powell, no longer considers himself a Republican, and asked if the GOP realized they encouraged this wildness to grow and grow. Powell replied, they did, and that's why I can no longer call myself a fellow Republican. Somebody wrote, nothing like telling Hillary to use private email, being with these crooks all these years, and on the verge of complete exposure, you duck out. How do you sleep at night? Is that true? Did Colin Powell advise Hillary Clinton to use private email? Because if he did, that's atrocious. Oh my gosh. Okay. But back to my previous point that the FBI bulletin reports armed group is planning a huge uprising the report says conditionally if Trump is removed by the 25th Amendment. And I'm not enjoying that, because that sounds like the FBI is a little bit buying into the hostage situation idea of don't impeach Trump, don't remove him from government ahead of time, don't shorten his remaining 12 days or whatever it is now, or worse things will happen. I mean, those people are planning to protest and riot and commit violent acts regardless of the House of Nancy Pelosi's response of impeaching Trump in the House, or trying to ask Mike Pence to institute the 25th Amendment and at least remove Trump for 4 days. Wesley, I'll take time out of my day to correct you on that. The Obama administration didn't take babies from parents. Children who turned up at the border unaccompanied minors were detained whilst their asylum claims were processed through immigration court. The only administration that has devised a policy to purposefully separate babies from their parents was the Trump administration. Rod Rosenstein was on a call with various attorney generals in different states who said, okay, but this new zero tolerance policy where you arrest all migrant parents and separate them from their children, that we're not going to apply that to people with like children under 5, are we? And Rod Rosenstein replied that there were to be no exceptions and that there were no age-related restrictions on that policy. So it was to be enforced as it had been written. Everybody, or it was directed at families to stop migrant families seeking refuge in the United States. So you have been misinformed, and you should consider that possibility if you have enough decency left in your soul to realize that all of the arrested people who committed crimes and who sought to overthrow the government at the Capitol a few days ago were similarly misled, similarly as you have been. So you've been told that the Trump administration didn't separate babies from their parents when they did. And you can tally that up amongst the multitude of other lies that you have been told by conservative media. So Molly is explaining that South Dakota is taking newborns from babies from their parents. Are we talking about Native Americans? They can be taken away from the granddaughter and end up being adopted by white people. Yes. So South Dakota is essentially trafficking. But who are they taking? Oh, Native women, yeah. So they're taking Native American children from their parents. That's awful. And yes, we know Betsy DeVos was co-owner of adoption agencies that did that. Holy points out that your farm was blacklisted in Georgia because you were Jewish and you were punished and attacked at school. That's unfortunate. Yes, the adoption agencies certainly do make money out of adopting child victims out to Christian families. Oh, that's nice. Jack's letting us know that there's billboards in Utah currently thanking Mitt Romney for taking a stand against Donald Trump. Alan, I think there is a degree of American exceptionalism, but what it shouldn't be taken to mean is American perfection. America is not immune to criticism. America is not immune to flaws. There are occasionally downsides associated with America's virtues, and they need to be moderated and talked about and mitigated against so that they don't turn into flaws. There are advantages to capitalism and individualism, but when you turn that into such a strong phobia of communism that you can manipulate people into elevating the career of an aspiring demagogue such as Trump, or not aspiring anymore. He's made good on a lot of his demagogue potential. So if you're so anti-communism that fear can drive you to unquestioningly support a demagogue such as Donald Trump, then that strength and advantage in celebrating your country's good qualities has become a liability. And that's what we always have to look for, where strengths become liabilities and where liabilities might actually work to your advantage. Molly says you already have National Guard around the Pennsylvania Capitol. Walter points out that, yes, they're planning more this week. It's good that the governor and other state officials are being protected by state police. I'm wondering how long this high level of alert needs to stay for, because people do burn out, and there's already a lot of medical professional burnout because of high levels of COVID. In the UK, where COVID is also being managed very poorly by a similarly conservative demagogue type person, Boris Johnson, is so overwhelming their national healthcare system that doctors are being asked to make decisions that are very morally depleting. and very psychologically depleting, because you have to ration care. You can't help everybody, and nurses are being seconded from non-ICU wards to work in the ICU wards when they haven't received the specialized training that could be of long duration that you need to work efficiently in an ICU ward, which makes it more easy to make mistakes. And that would be very stressful and sad and awful. And there's no respite either. When COVID is burgeoning in your community, then the people bearing the brunt of that psychological pressure are healthcare workers. They're also bearing the brunt of a lot of potential exposure to COVID. If they have any protective equipment failures, any holes, any masks that get overused because they can't get a new one, they're more likely to suffer from a severe case of COVID. And of course, the UK has a high prevalence now of that new strain of COVID, which is more infectious. And in Sweden, wards are filling up with children as well. So the new strain appears to also be potentially more severe for more children. The FBI does appear to be letting us down a bit. They apparently didn't make a threat assessment for the counting of the Electoral College votes, which seems extraordinary. And it's a shame that, yes, DC has no mayor, which added to the layers of difficulty that was experienced by legislators who tried to get help when they were under siege and at risk of being taken hostage and executed by Trump fanatics. Exactly. America is certainly far from perfect, and a lot of the ills besetting America are a product of that over-devotion to American exceptionalism, so that people are blinded and manipulated by unscrupulous politicians working on behalf of greedy people, i.e. Republican politicians and their voters who are tricked into thinking they're protecting the social fabric by voting in Republicans who will take actions that hurt them, erode their social services, underpay their teachers and other state-employed people, erode the quality of their schools and the equipment of their schools, whilst saying that they are the only people able to defend the virtues of independence and non-reliance on government help. Oh, pumpkin. Vernon Jones has left the Democratic Party because he's Black, and there's a premium on Black Americans who will betray their demographic by associating themselves with horrible, unprincipled white nationalists. So for some people, that incentive is powerful enough to get them to abandon principle and to champion causes that lead to death and destruction. So Vernon Jones is clearly a man with a price, who, whether that price is the increased self-importance and exposure you get from being a Democrat who has flipped to become a Republican. Most decent people recognize that the Republican Party has put Americans in danger and continues to put Americans in danger, and has supported a dangerous insurrection effort. I'll just show you a little bit from the Florida Sun Sentinel, which shows an increasing proportion of Florida Republicans changing their voter registrations in the aftermath of Trump supporters' violent insurrection, which caused the death of 5 people so far. So notable numbers that in Miami-Dade, the state's most populous county, more than 7 times as many Republicans as Democrats changed their party registrations in the aftermath of the violence in Washington, D.C. The ratio of Republican to Democratic switches was almost as high in Palm Beach County, the 3rd most populous. Yes, the UK does have instances of the new COVID strain. And look, the US also had a super spreader event at the Capitol on the 6th So there's a representative that took a COVID test after being cloistered in with her Republican colleagues who refused to wear a mask, and she's COVID positive and resting at home. So you have the new strain in Pennsylvania. There you go. It's probably all over the place. Yes, a lot of people who have COVID don't get diagnosed or receive medical treatment for it necessarily, because it's a disease that operates by stealth, in that a significant number of the people who have it have a heterogeneous presentation of it, in that they can have mild or asymptomatic cases. That's why it's a very insidious disease that requires really determined, really clear public health messaging. And yes, absolutely, the mismanagement of COVID has caused confirmed 350,000 deaths, but excess death studies, I hadn't seen that update, say 500,000. You're talking about 500,000 excess deaths in the US. I hadn't seen that updated reporting. So thank you. If you can find where you saw that, I would be gratified if you'd share it with me. So I hope you were pleased to hear that news from one small Florida newspaper that in Miami-Dade, at least there's 7 times as many Republicans as Democrats changing their party registration. Because I hope that's something that is a phenomenon that is repeated across multiple American states, that even though violent extremists in America have become emboldened to a degree by the partial success of their violent riot, I mean the success in terms of a lot of them left the premises without being arrested. Okay, let's have a look. Oh yes, so the representative who has COVID now, I'll show you. Is Representative Bonnie Watson-Coleman. Oh, she looks like she's not that young either. Proudly serving the people of New Jersey's 12th Congressional District, proud Black woman, progressive Democrat, member of the resistance. All right, so she's not young and she's a Black woman, which puts her in the demographic that's vulnerable to inadequate medical attention and consequently higher risk for negative medical outcomes for COVID. So I hope she's taking good care of herself. She says she's resting at home. There's an update from 2 hours ago that Dow Chemicals, the massive chemical company, has committed to not donating to any member of Congress that objected to the certification of the presidential vote. And this is not a pause. The company won't donate to those Republicans ever again. So the person who has helped make that happen is Judd Legum, a freelance writer who writes a newsletter called Popular Information, a newsletter about politics and power, and his Twitter handle is Judd Legum, JUDDLEGUM. He's a really important person to follow because I'll make it bigger so you can see. Thanks for looking it up for me. Excellent. I don't have the figures, but in Miami-Dade County, it's 7 times as many Republicans as Democrats. So the ratio of that is promising, that Americans are looking at what happened in the Capitol and recognizing that Trump helped to inflame and incite violent insurrectionist ideals and actions. So yes, well done to Judd. Good job. And that's the 5th company, I believe, that's made a commitment to not donating anymore to Republicans who fueled that delusion on the part of Republican voters, most Republican voters, that somehow Trump had really won the election. All right, and Senator Bennett is here rebuking all the members of the Senate and the House who falsely asserted that the election was stolen, while knowing that claim was false and unsupported by the facts, as demonstrated by the 62 court cases that have been lost by the Trump administration, including now the Supreme Court has rejected expediting some more cases by Trump and his lawyers and Trump-friendly attorney generals that tried to, again, argue and insist that Trump won the election. So they're like, nope, we're not going to do that quickly. They don't want to get on board, considering they have lifetime appointments, with Trump's anti-democratic efforts to install himself as a perpetual dictator in the United States and end the processes of elections, which he does, because when you overturn an election result, you are paving the way for no more elections, potentially sham elections, yes.
There and tell them the truth, which is that every single member of this Senate knows this election wasn't stolen.
So yes, there were the riots, and then
for everybody here and for our country. One of the things I was thinking about today is something I often think about when I'm on this floor, which is that the founders of this country, the people that wrote our Constitution, actually knew our history better than we know our history. And I was thinking about that history today as we saw the mob riot in Washington, D.C., thinking about what the founders were thinking about when they wrote our Constitution, which was what happened to the Roman Republic, when armed gangs doing the work for politicians prevented Rome from casting their ballots for consuls, for praetors, for senators. These were the offices in Rome. And these armed gangs ran through the streets of Rome, keeping elections from being started, keeping elections from ever being called. And in the end, because of that, the Roman Republic fell and a dictator took its place. And that was the end of the Roman Republic, or any republic for that matter, until this beautiful Constitution was written in the United States of America.
Nicely beautiful.
So it is my fervent hope that the way that we respond to this today, my dear colleague, is that we give the biggest bipartisan vote we can in support of our democracy and in support of our Constitution and in rejection for what we saw today and what the Roman Republic saw in its own time. There's a tendency around this place, I think, to always believe that we're the first people to confront something when that's seldom the case, and to underappreciate what the effect of our actions will be. We need to deeply appreciate in this moment our obligation to the Constitution, our obligation to the democracy, our obligation to the Republic. There are people in this chamber that have twisted the words of a statute written in the 19th century that was meant to actually settle our electoral dispute, to leave them with the states. As the senator from Utah was saying, to give us a ministerial role, except in very rare circumstances. That's what that law is about, that the senator of Texas was talking about today. And that's the law that's leading us to be asked to overturn the judgments of 60 courts in America, many of them courts in Arizona, some of whom have howled the president's lawyers out of the courtrooms because there's no evidence of fraud. And by the way, the fact that 37% or 39% of Americans think there's no evidence of fraud, or they think there's evidence of fraud, does not mean there is fraud. If you turned a blind eye to conspiracy theory, you can't now come to the floor of the Senate and say you're ignoring the people who believe that the election was stolen. Go out there and tell them the truth, which is that every single member of this Senate knows this election wasn't stolen. And that we, just as in the Roman Republic, have a responsibility to protect the independence of the judiciary from politicians who will stop at nothing to hold on to power. There's nothing new about that either. That's been true since the First Republic was founded.
Okay, good. Well, he told them off. They didn't care because Republicans are pursuing illegitimate power on Trump's coattails. Some of them might be feeling a little bit queasy about it, but that's just what they're doing. Trump believed that the insurrection effort would work. He presumably had inside help. His appointments at the Pentagon, potentially people in the Capitol Police leadership team that purposefully failed to bolster resources. We don't know at this stage. But I would like to now share a Twitter thread with you, which I think is highly pertinent. Yes. And Jeff brought us some good news as well, which is that, we'll have to check to confirm these ourselves, but also I believe it from Jeff, Giuliani tossed from the New York bar. Bazinga. So that is exciting. They had already said that they'd received a lot of complaints. Look, a troll pushing the angle that you can't vote if the voting system can be hacked by a 12-year-old, which is based on an article which gave a false impression to people. The system that the 12-year-old hacked in a competition was not representative of hacking an election system. It was hacking a local, something that resembled a local reporting website, which, yeah, sure, that's hackable, but there's no point hacking a local reporting website if you can't fundamentally hack the election. So that's one reason why your premise is false, and voting is important, and trolls who seek to disseminate that disinformation that voting is undesirable, you're part of the anti-democratic movement that I presume you know is fascist, because when people are discouraged from voting, then just those with the greatest money, power, and drive to serve themselves will gain office and put themselves in leadership positions. Yep, so that hacking competition, once again, your premise is faulty. The hacking competition was to hack a website reporting the results. So even if you hack a website reporting the results, but the results are still being collected and tabulated separately to that, then at some point your hacking efforts will be exposed. So that competition was broadly misrepresented, and I'm going to authorize my moderators to mute you so that you just don't take up too much of my time pushing your disinformation. Thank you for introducing the topic so that I can disabuse people of that faulty understanding that you share and that you're promoting. But yes, I'm done with those particular interruptions. Yes, the former Air Force, was he a lieutenant? His surname is Brock, and he was photographed holding zip ties on the floor of the Senate, dressed in camouflage army-style fatigues and with a helmet. He was identified by Twitter sleuths who tipped off Roman Farrow as well, who called former Lieutenant Brock and confirmed with Brock that, yes, he was the person in the photos. He claimed to have just picked up the zip ties and was looking around the empty Senate chamber for an official to give them to. So it is nice to know that his ex-wife helped confirm his identity to the FBI so that he could get arrested. No, Judy was a corrupt mayor before he became very obviously corrupt to the rest of us. Yes, I'm discussing money laundering. Yes, absolutely, we can assume Trump was part of the plan. Ali Alexander, a right-wing Christian extremist pro-Trump activist who organized the Stop the Steal rally, has said openly already that he was collaborating with various Republican Congress members, Mo Brooks, Gozar, and another one, I think. He definitely had brought zip ties to imprison and kidnap legislators, yes. All right. So this is Adam Davidson. He's a reporter for, let's have a look. He's a reporter for Freelance. and has written a book called The Passion Economy. Ooh. Anyway, he wrote one major cause of Trumpism is money laundering. Trump has made much of his money over the past decade helping third-tier oligarchs launder their money. And he makes a point which I rarely see made about money laundering. We just focus on the fact that if you do it, you're a criminal who has no interest in maintaining the rule of law. But Adam makes this point and says this was money stolen from the people of Azerbaijan, Russia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Kazakhstan, etc. So it's not a victimless crime. Money laundering is helping criminals avoid detection and avoid the reach of the law and continue their illicit activities. But the victims of those activities are people who have their money stolen and smuggled out of the country. So these third-tier oligarchs, leaders of Azerbaijan, Russia, Indonesia, Malaysia, and Kazakhstan. That's a lot of countries to be helping launder money for the oligarchs of those respective countries. So Trump did not earn their business by offering a better hotel or residential project. Trump charged far more than other companies that are better. But he earned their business by participating in fairly obvious schemes, including one scheme that was almost certainly aiding Iran's Revolutionary Guard. This means that he was rewarded for his willingness to thwart laws in order to offer support to violent, anti-democratic people. This is why I and many others who covered Trump's businesses understood this man fully and are not at all surprised. But it is also an indictment of our country's refusal to prosecute white-collar crimes. When some significant source of wealth is most easily attained through thwarting laws, then we are funding law-breaking and lawbreakers. I know we're not focused on this now, but I so hope we see a transformation in our approach to white-collar crime. When you look at healthy nations that collapse, the cause is pretty much always a shift in economy from value-adding to rent-seeking and theft. And that's the end of that thread. They're calling it dark, dirty money. We've facilitated it and tolerated it for too long. Oh, I prefer the term dirty money to dark money because I think perpetually using dark as a synonym for criminal or bad is a subconscious way to contribute to racist culture. Yes, millions of people have bought into Trumpism. We're certainly witnessing difficult times for America right now. The positive signs are that 81 million people voted for Joe Biden and that millions of people put time and effort into organizing and consolidating people's understanding of what was needed for healthy leadership in America and reassuring people that despite all of the negative propaganda pushed out by a fascist government such as the Trump administration, that Joe Biden was a good person, that he was a very established entity with the American people. He'd been a vice president for 8 years. He had a high enough celebrity profile to be able to withstand all of the fabricated fake charges that Trump could accuse him of. So those people who still do take Trump pronouncements as gospel and Trump affiliated pronouncements as gospel, many of them genuinely believe that Joe Biden is a communist or a gate opener to communism and that they were fighting for their own lives in the insurrection. In the attempted insurrection and the overrunning of the Capitol. Not that I want to excuse them. I think they're responsible for their own media consumption and they're responsible for the arrogance they've shown in detaching themselves from reputable media sources and just believing Trump when he says, don't listen to mainstream media. They're liars and you're too special to believe those lies. Which reminds me, I wrote to someone to ask if he would consent to be interviewed. I don't know if he's necessarily replied, but I'm just going to... Oh, there's me. He highlighted a paper. While I'm scrolling past, I'll show you somebody's comment. That said, it's a bit hard to stomach all the "I got caught up in the moment" excuses from people who bought plane tickets, got time off work, made hotel reservations, packed their matching tactical gear, flew across the country, and then stormed the Capitol. That's not how moments work, which is true. I'm mad that Angela Merkel has said she finds it problematic about Twitter banning Trump. I mean, Trump was using Twitter to incite violence. It's really perfectly fine to ban him. It's not a slippery slope. Someone, in regards to that thread I was reading with money laundering, someone wrote that they listened to an interview with Adam Davidson and he helped her change her understanding of white-collar crime and helped her understand what money laundering actually was. She said, "We can't understand Trump without understanding crime, so thank you for your excellent work." And he wrote back, "I'd be curious to know what exactly changed in your thinking." And she wrote, "I had basically assumed white-collar crime was victimless, so there was no pressing need to pursue it, especially if it wasn't follow the money kind of crime depicted on The Wire. I also didn't understand how oligarchs engaged in it multinationally. And I definitely didn't grasp how it was key to understanding Trump. I thought his businesses were basically all just cons and New York mob boss type stuff." Well, yes, it's so important to explain to people that money laundering doesn't just mean, or doesn't at all mean, washing your currency. It means helping organized criminals get away with their crimes and evade the law and change not the denomination. I change identifying numbers on the money that they've received in profit from their criminal activities of sex trafficking women and girls, and dealing in drugs and being warlords who hurt people for money. Someone makes a comment that people don't understand what money laundering is. Trying to explain it to people I know confirms that there needs to be more focus on defining it and how it works. A program that covers this and basic education of civics and other general info seems necessary for everyone. True. I'd love to have a show called Let's Learn American Civics, because I could do it without embarrassment and learn together with people. But it's true that there's also some new crackdowns on shell companies to combat corruption. So the piece of legislation that Trump didn't want to pass, and he claimed his motivation was that it didn't include a 230 overturning of something called 230 amendment or something. The idea that social media companies aren't responsible for what's published on their platforms, that people self-publish. Trump's like, I want to get rid of that because I hate social media companies because Twitter and everybody else are my enemies, blah, blah, blah. But other people have pointed out the real likely reason why he didn't want to sign the bill that was going to fund the salaries of people in the armed services was likely because of a provision to end money laundering by cracking down on shell companies. Companies set up not to do business, not to add value, but to provide cover for criminals to exchange contaminated currency used in crimes to make that money undetectable by exchanging it for new ones, by pretending to have some exchange of goods and services or inflating some goods and service transaction in order for profits to be generated and new money to be circulated into the hands of the criminals, creating an extra layer away to make detection more difficult. So apparently he has a piece in the New Yorker on money laundering as well, which means that's something I'll have to share one other day. In the interim, how good is everybody feeling about the inauguration? Because I'm feeling concerned that with all of these attacks planned on the inauguration and our understanding that the FBI and other agencies didn't adequately prepare to protect the Capitol from all of the insurgencies that were being openly plotted on social media platforms. I no longer trust in their capacity to protect Joe Biden and Kamala Harris at an event that will very likely be the last gasp opportunity for Trump fanatics to seek to please their master by killing his opposition. So yes, Elizabeth wants it on Zoom and then 6 months later in person. That would be great. So yes, you're scared about it. I'm scared too. Kath would like me to teach a class like that. Thank you, Kath. I mean, my interest in teaching a class like that is more in presenting a class like that, because I would be learning concurrently with the students. Kath says she understands Trump very well. It's like listening to your narcissistic Republican mother. That reminds me of the psychologist that I went to Twitter to search for. Maybe if I can find it in a place where, what about my notifications? What about mentions? Alan's tagged me. Thank you. In a discussion with your protest mum, a discussion with Anna Lindsguzik. Thank you. Yes, that'll be something for me to do soon. Michael Moore thinks there might be more attacks. And as much as I hate Michael Moore, yes. And I still haven't read that New Yorker piece by Timothy Snyder, just the very important quotes from it that say post-truth presidency means a pre-fascist presidency. And that was the lead up for 4 years of Trump. Thank you to all the people who've been listening. Yes, there's only one impeachment article, I believe, and that's incitement of insurrection, in which they cite his speech before the riot and his remarks prior to that, and his taped call to Georgian election officials asking them to find him 11,000 votes. So yes, he tried for the more subtle approach of just pressuring Republican officials to find him votes to overturn the election that way, and then the fallback mechanism was to whip up his loyal supporters, who he sees as his own potential army of manipulated fanatics who will do his bidding and who will believe anything he tells them. So that if he repeats himself and says, this is your last chance to save America, that you have to fight for what you believe to be right, you have to fight for Trump, you have to show those weak Republicans how to do it, etc. I think Giuliani has been taken off the New York bar. That's disbarred, isn't it? See you, Walter. Thanks for joining in today. And take care, everybody. I will go. And Alan, I'm taking note of that interview you've tagged me in. So hopefully talk to you all soon. And until then, take care. The most disturbing Trump supporters are evangelical preachers. Trump fascism fits very well within an evangelical framework, which seeks to promote patriarchal hierarchy as the ideal way for societies to be organized, with men as the head of households and marriage being restricted to heterosexual marriage in which men are dominant. And that's what evangelical Christians believe is arguing for the sanctity of the family, and also arguing that their religion should get to inform legislative support for whether or not women can elect to end a pregnancy before, rather than proceed with generating a child that they believe would impair the lot in life of their other children or their families or their own lives. Trump was pushed on you since you were a kid, because yes, I believe you. Republican Jesus. Oh, Trump is Republican Jesus? Yes, they absolutely do think Trump was ordained by God. He's made references to being the chosen one himself in his speeches to journalists. He understands that it has power, being perceived as a deity. Oh, you have a government class. Oh, if you ever want to collaborate with me. Yes. You missed it, got to catch the replay. Okay. Good luck. Have fun. Anything else that I've missed? No. Oh, Kathy would pay for that class. Well, there you go. I'm trying to have a focus on providing value that people enjoy so much that they would pay for it, to increase my standing with my family and my own self-confidence. Yes. Tomorrow will be scary because of the Alamo, because of the history of the Alamo being associated with insurrection. Is that what's happening? That's tomorrow. Okay. Well, good luck, everybody. Take care. Oh, Alan says, please remember that I do have a Patreon account. If anybody wants to sign up for $2 a month, feel free to do so. There's nothing special that I offer to Patreon subscribers other than just my gratitude. And you can do it if you want to feel like you're part of the compulsion taking me back to the microphone most days. So that's only if you want. I'm certainly not in dire financial need or anything, but I do love and value the contributions of my Patreons, and I thank you for helping me feel that what I do is of value, which increases in turn my ambition to do more and to do so more professionally, and to seek to improve on a continuous basis. So thank you. Thank you. Amazing streams. Love it. Brilliance and beauty. Huzzah. Bless you. All right. Well, now I need to take a photo of that. I can't because I don't have a device. I'll just have to remember it. Thank you for saying I'm worth $2 a month. Love it. Night, night, Jeff. Thank you for letting us know about Rudy Giuliani. Can I speak on change and how that will take time? Well, you'll have to tell me more. You can direct message me, Bob, and tell me more about what you mean by that. And Alan, that's a great idea. If I could try and interview Anna, I love that. Thinking of people for me to interview is an invaluable service. Thanks, everybody. Take care. All the best. Talk to you soon.